I remember it was about a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago, Emma's father had open heart surgery, and as soon as she found out that that was going to take place, she rushed up to Tyler to be there with her father and her mother to help them, to serve, to minister to them, to do any and everything that was needed in the hospital or at the home. I think she cooked some meals, probably cleaned the house, and all kinds of things to help make a difficult and stressful situation less difficult and less stressful. I remember it was several years ago, Ellie gave us a phone call after being in a car accident. It was no fault of her own. I just want to clear the air there. No fault of her own. And thankfully it was not serious. But when you get a phone call and say, I've been in an accident, Em and I, we didn't really ask any questions. We just want to know where she was at. We jumped in the car, drove very quickly, so we weren't in a wreck, but carefully, to where she was, and hugged her and took care of her and helped her through the process. I remember, I guess it was just a year or two into my full-time ministry, I received a phone call at 1 o'clock in the morning. A friend of mine had been in a very serious accident and was rushed to the hospital. And I immediately jumped up, got dressed, and went to the hospital and sat with his wife and some others that were there to help them through this process of grieving and what was going on. And I would guess you probably have had some kind of event like that in your life, where something happened to someone that was very dear and precious to you, and the first thing that you did was rush to their side and help them and minister to them and serve them and pray with them and offer them words of comfort and do everything that you can to make a stressful and difficult situation that's full of grief and sorrow and questions to make that as less stressful and difficult as possible. I think it's human nature to rush to the aid of someone that you love when there is a difficult or horrible situation that presents itself in their life. It's just human nature. We want to help them. We want to love on them. We want to do everything that we can to let them know that no matter what happens, that God is going to work, things are going to work out and be okay. Sometimes that's what we want to say, but we can't promise that all the time. We see a situation like that in John chapter 11. Mary, Martha, and Lazarus were in a troubling situation, if you will. I don't know, maybe that's the best way to put that, especially Lazarus. Lazarus was the one that we're told was sick. Jesus' reaction to that news, Mary and Martha sent word to him, to Jesus, that Lazarus was sick. And Jesus' reaction to that news and what was going on is not the way I think that we would have reacted. When I got a call that Ellie was in trouble, we jumped in the car and went to her aid as quickly as possible. Jesus gets news that Lazarus is sick, and they want him to come, because they know what Jesus is capable of. They've seen Jesus heal the sick and cause the lame to walk, the blind to see, the deaf to hear, the mute to speak. They've seen Jesus do these things, and they know what Jesus is capable of. And who better to call than someone you're very close to that you know has the ability to heal your brother? Sometimes I wonder, I don't know in how sick Lazarus was. I mean, I know what happened, but in the very beginning, I wonder if maybe it was Lazarus that said to Mary and Martha, "Hey, call Jesus. I'm sick. I know something's not right. I know what he's capable of. Call Jesus. He can heal me." And so they do that, but Jesus' actions don't seem, at least from our perspective, they don't seem to show the love, care, and concern that maybe we would have shown in that moment. and doing everything we can to rush to the side of Lazarus, to heal him, to talk to him, to whatever the case may be. But as we read the text, we know the story. Jesus hangs around for 2 days where he was at before he goes to Bethany, and Lazarus dies. Does that bother you? Well, I have to answer that from two different perspectives. No, it doesn't, and from one perspective, because I know what happens. I see the end of the story. I know what takes place, and so that doesn't bother me. But then I put myself in the perspective of Mary and Martha in their shoes. And I've called for Jesus. I know what He's capable of. I know what He can do. I know He can work miracles, and I know He can heal the sick. But then He lingers for 2 days and doesn't rush to the aid of someone that He loves and cares for. That bothers me. If I was in that situation, if I was in Bethany and sent word for Jesus and He doesn't come to the aid of my brother, especially when I know what's going on and what he's capable of, I think that would bother me. I know that would bother me. And so I have to look at that from two different perspectives. But I love John chapter 11 for a few reasons. One of those is it shows the raw emotions of the humanity of Jesus. And we'll look at that in a little bit. But John 11 also teaches me that God doesn't have to act in the way that I want Him to act. And probably if God would act in the way that I wanted Him to act, it wouldn't be as glorious and wonderful if when God just acts on His own time and does what He knows is best. So I have to keep that in mind when I think about waiting on God and waiting on the Lord to act, and Him not doing the things that I want Him to do when I want Him to do them in the time frame that I think they ought to be done. And it also, I like this John 11 because I love the power that is found in the words of Jesus when He walks to the tomb and He tells Lazarus to come out. It's very, very powerful. Look at John 11. Let's read verses 1 through 6. It says, "Now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. It was Mary who anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped His feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was ill. So the sisters sent to Him, saying, 'Lord, he whom you love is ill.'" I struggle with this because I know what Jesus does, and I put myself in the shoes of Mary and Martha. But Jesus heard it. When Jesus heard it, He said, "This illness does not lead to death. It is for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it." Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when He heard that Lazarus was ill, He stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. And so Jesus hangs around. He gets news. He could have left immediately, but He doesn't. He hangs around 2 days longer. Why? Well, we know. We know why Jesus does not respond the way that we would have responded, or the way that we think He ought to respond. We know. But you put yourself in the situation, or you think of yourself, if you're in the Lord's waiting room, and you're asking, you've been praying to God for days, for weeks, for months, maybe even years. "Lord, do this. Please, come to my rescue. Open this door." Whatever, fill in the blank. And He doesn't do it. We want to know why. It would be good for us. It would benefit us. It would be even to His glory. Why doesn't He move? Why doesn't He work? Why doesn't He act in the time frame that we want Him to? I think this story maybe shines a little bit of light on that. Because out of all the people that Jesus knew, He seemed to have a special relationship with Mary and Martha and Lazarus. He's described as the one that He loved. He spent time in their home. If there's anybody that you would think that Jesus would run to their side immediately. It would have been Mary and Martha or Lazarus, but he doesn't. Jesus doesn't rush to their home to check on Lazarus. He doesn't rush to their home to comfort Mary or Martha. He purposefully stays where he's at for 2 additional days. He lets them suffer. Think about that. That's exactly what he does. He lets them suffer. That's troubling, isn't it? And we wonder why. And I think sometimes the best thing that we can do is let people remain in their situation and not rush to them and rescue them. There's lessons that are learned. There's things that are processed. There's faith that is strengthened. There's all kinds of good things that can take place that in the moment seem like terrible, horrible, bad things. Why is this happening? That very important faith-building lessons are learned. And then, I was talking to, I think maybe it was Rocky and Gina a while ago, that those lessons then we can use to pass on, to minister, and to help other people see their situation from another perspective. But from the perspective of Lazarus, again, I wonder, maybe he was the one that said, hey Mary, hey Martha, call Jesus. I'm not well. I don't know what's going to happen, but I know what Jesus is capable of. And that's what they do. This account shows us that God works differently than we expect. And I'm convinced because God knows how things turn out. He sees the end of all things. God doesn't have to make decisions in the moment with limited information like we have to. We have to process the moment. Here's what the moment is. Here's what the situation is. Here's everything that's going on. In this moment, at this time, I can make this decision based on what I know. That's not God. God sees it all. God knows the beginning from the end. Matter of fact, God knew what was going to happen in this situation before it even happened in our lives. He knows. He knows all things, how they will work out. And chapter 11, verse 4 says, this will take place for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it. Jesus knew Lazarus was going to die, and he waits 2 days. And then they leave. Verse 7 says, let us go to Judea again. Paying no attention to the disciples' warning, Jesus assures them that all is going to work out and be okay. He says, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I go to wake him. The disciples don't understand the metaphor here, believing Lazarus is resting, that he's going to recover in some way. So Jesus tells them plainly, Lazarus has died. And for your sake, he says, I'm glad I was not there, so that you may believe. That's the purpose of John's gospel. That's what John writes, John 20, verses 30 and 31, that all these things were written so that we may believe. Finally, when they arrive in Bethany, Lazarus has been dead for 4 days. His body has begun to deteriorate, to decay. We're told that there would have been a stench by now, and I think that this is recorded so that there would be no room for doubt. Nobody could be skeptic about, was he dead? Was he alive? Those kinds of things. There's no doubt that Lazarus had passed away. And when Mary or Martha had heard that Jesus was close, she left Mary at the house. She runs to meet Jesus and expresses, the first thing that she does, she expresses her disappointment with Jesus. He was late. According to her, he was late. And she blames him. If you had been here, if you had arrived on time, if you would not have waited before coming, if you would have come when we asked you to come, my brother would still be alive. He wouldn't be dead. Jesus affectionately looks into Martha's eyes and with authority in his voice says, your brother will rise again. And Martha says, I know that he will rise in the resurrection on the last day. Martha's wrestling with her faith and with her feelings and struggling with what she knows has taken place and what Jesus is made at least able to do in the last day. And Jesus challenges her. He says, I am the resurrection and the life. Present tense. In the moment. Right now, Martha, I am the resurrection and the life. And whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who believes or lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this? It's an important question. Jesus had come to Bethany to destroy the work of the devil. He had come to give death a taste of its final judgment. He was about to demonstrate that there would come a time when all the dead in the graves would hear his voice and come forth. Mary didn't know this, and she certainly didn't know what was about to happen, but the power with which Jesus spoke these words brings hope to her soul. Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God who is coming into the world. And so Martha goes to tell Mary these things. She comes to see Jesus, and the first that she does express her disappointment as well. Almost the same words. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. The grief and tears of Mary and Martha, and perhaps their disappointment with him, deeply moved the spirit of Jesus. Let's read verses 33 through 35. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in his spirit and greatly troubled. And he said, Where have you laid him? And they said to him, Lord, come and see. And then we have those two words, Jesus wept. Church, we serve a God who sees our tears. We serve a God who feels what we feel. We serve a Savior who understands. He hurts when we hurt. When He sees us hurting, when He sees us grieving. He's not distant. He's not like, oh, they'll get over it. Things will get better. It's just something they've got to go through. He feels that. He knows. He hurts with us. Our God is moved by our pain and our sorrow. He hurts with us. He shared the grief of Mary and Martha. And in the shadow of this miracle, we witness the humanity of Jesus as He weeps. Tears fell from His face. He hurt. And everybody there saw the hurt and the pain that He felt. So much so that the crowd, the Jews, say this, see how much He loved him. And others remarked, He could have kept this man from dying. They thought He was late, just like Mary and Martha thought He was late. But at the tomb, verse 38 says that Jesus was deeply moved again. It's an interesting word. Same thing in verse 33 that we just read. This deeply moved, it's not a feeling of sorrow. It's not a way of saying that Jesus was sad. It's not even really a way of saying that Jesus was grieving, although He was. The meaning of the word, interesting enough, means to snort with anger. To snort, it is, it's a funny word. It means that Jesus snorted with anger. And I think what's going on here is that Jesus is not only irritated with the Jews there that had such little faith in Him, but I think He's angry at death as well. And what it accomplishes and the power that it has over humanity. I think Jesus is angry with death and the pain that it causes. And so Jesus says, take away the stone. Martha says, Lord, by this time there will be an odor, for he has been dead for 4 days. And Jesus says, did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God? Let's read verses 41 through 43. So they took away the stone. And Jesus lifted up His eyes and He said, He speaks to the Father, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me. But I said this on account of the people standing around, that they may believe that you sent me. And when He had said these things, He cried out with a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. And the man who had died came out, his hands and feet bound with linen strips, and his face wrapped with a cloth. And Jesus said to them, unbind him and let him go. Lazarus, who had been laid in the tomb 4 days ago, whose body has begun to deteriorate, so much so that there would have been a smell when they rolled away the stone. Everybody would have known. Jesus says, Lazarus, come out. And Lazarus walks out. It's amazing. It's astonishing. He walks out with the burial bandages or garment wrapped around him. And he says, take those off of him. He's not a dead man. He's alive. Take those things off. Death no longer had dominion over Lazarus, at least not in that moment. I think there's some very important faith-building lessons that we can learn when we find ourselves in God's waiting room. Number one, God doesn't work on my time. I don't like that. Doesn't seem fair that God doesn't work on my time. I'm bound by time. God's not bound by time. God created time. God's outside of the realm of time. God sees the beginning of time all the way to the end of the time and everywhere and everything in between. It doesn't seem fair. But Mary and Martha found themselves in the Lord's waiting room. Both Mary and Martha accused Jesus of being late, not being there on time. And if he had been there on time, this wouldn't have happened. Lazarus would not have died. They were unaware that Jesus was right on time. Jesus wasn't late. Jesus was where he was supposed to be when he was supposed to be there. And he did what he was supposed to do when he was supposed to do it. He works at the right time to produce and to build and to strengthen faith. I think of a time in my life where I had been praying for years for God to open a door. And God opened a door, but it wasn't the door that I wanted. But it was the only door. And so I felt like I didn't have a choice. And we walked through it. And I prayed and prayed and prayed. God, this wasn't the right door. Trust me, I know. This was not the right door to open. But you know, when God opened the right door, how much more glorious and faith-building and my trust grew in Him, that if He had opened it when I wanted Him to open it, it wouldn't have been there. It wouldn't have happened that way. I think my faith would have grown, but not near to the degree that it did when He opened it in His time and not in my time. Jesus could have healed Lazarus when He first got the word. He could have prayed then. He could have said, Lazarus, be healed. And Lazarus could have got up off his bed and walked in there and eaten breakfast or whatever with Mary and Martha and said, I'm feeling good. He could have done it that way. But Jesus allowed Lazarus to die. God doesn't work on my time, but He works at exactly the right time. Look at back to verses 14 and 15. When Jesus told them plainly, Lazarus had died, and for your sake, I'm glad that I was not there so that you may believe, but let us go to him. Jesus worked at the right time so people would believe, so that faith would be strengthened. We have to learn to be patient with God and have faith that He's working on His perfect timing. It doesn't seem fair, but God doesn't work on my time. Although it doesn't seem fair, I'm glad that He doesn't. Number two, what is painful to me, God can use to strengthen me. I think of a couple weeks ago of Abraham and Sarah, of Job, Joseph, David, and now here, Mary and Martha and Lazarus. God has purposes beyond what I can imagine, even what I can fathom. Which would have been more faith-building to Mary and Martha and the crowd of mourners as they looked on? Would it have been more faith-building for Jesus to show up on time, according to Mary and Martha, and heal a man that was sick? Or was it more faith-building to be late, allow him to die, and call a man who had been dead for 4 days out of the grave? Which is more faith-building? Which do you think caused people to believe? When God works on His own time. And so what is painful to them, what is painful to me, what is painful to us, God can use to strengthen us. Look at James chapter 1, verses 3 and 4. Let's start in verses 2, 3, and 4, chapter 1, James. Count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds, for you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness, and let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. Be perfect and complete. It's reaching the end goal. Not perfect in the way that we think of perfect, but reaching or fulfilling a goal, that kind of thing. David wrote, "It was good for me that I was afflicted, that I might learn your statutes." Psalm 119 and verse 71. You know, it is extremely difficult to see and realize God at work in the moment. But hindsight, as we say, is 20/20. It's faith building to look back and see, oh, I see God at work. How did I not see that in the moment? How could I have not trusted in that? Why did I not have faith that God would work? You know, every time we can look back and see that, and I think God does that, at least in some small part, for the purposes of building our faith when we see or are in those situations again. And we wonder, is God working? And I can think back and go, I know God has been at work in times past like this. Of course He's working right now. I may not see it in the moment. The door may not be open when I want it to. I can't pull back the curtain and see what's going on, but I can trust, based on God's past history in my life, that God's at work. And what is painful to me, God can even use to strengthen me. God is working that our faith may grow. And then number 3, and I think this is really the purpose of why John wrote this and put it in his gospel. Jesus is the source of life. This is the reason that we have chapter 11 in the book of John. We don't know all that Jesus is doing. But one thing we should never do is doubt His love and His care and His concern for us. I don't want to say that Mary and Martha doubted Jesus' love and care and concern for them. I think it's certainly possible. I think I probably would have if I called for Jesus and I know that He was a close friend of mine, and He had the ability to not raise, but at least heal Lazarus in that moment. But He doesn't rush to my side and help. I think I would have been disappointed. And I think they were to some degree. I think they expressed that. You're late. And He died because you were late. And Jesus says, I am the truth. I am the resurrection and the life. Those were other words. It's John 14. We're not there yet. But this miracle was about something bigger than removing grief and taking sorrow away. This miracle was about the power of Jesus over death. And here we have Mary and Martha, Lazarus in the tomb, Mary and Martha, all the other Jews that had come and were there now mourning the death and saying, I know Jesus loved him. If only He had been here. And I kind of picture this. Jesus is there. He's about to ask for the stone to be rolled away. You know, have you seen the Westerns where, you know, the good guy and the bad guy, they're out in the, Main Street. Everybody's behind closed doors and windows, but they're peeking out because there's about to be a showdown. Who's going to win, the good guy or the bad guy? I kind of picture that's what's going on here. It's high noon, and there's a showdown between Jesus and death. Who's going to win? And He says, roll back the stone. And He yells out, Lazarus, come forth. Isn't it fascinating that death listens to Jesus? A dead man listens to Jesus and he walks out of the grave. This would have never happened if Jesus would have acted when Mary and Martha wanted him to act and expected him to act. Jesus, come to our brother's aid. This would have never happened if he would have been, quote, on time and submitted to the request of Mary and Martha when they wanted him to do what they wanted him to do. This would have never taken place. Few passages are filled with more hope than this one, because no occasion feels more helpless or hopeless than death. That's the end. Nothing changes after death. Nothing can be done after death. It's over. The person's dead. No more chances, no more hope. Death has spoken. It's final. But not in Jesus. Not anymore. Jesus has the final word, and the final word is this: I am the resurrection and the life. This is just, I think what happens in John 11 is just an appetizer to what takes place in John chapter 20, when Jesus walks out of the grave on His own power, on His own accord. No one called Jesus out. He did it Himself. And so death is not the final say. Let's close with John chapter 5. Jesus says in John chapter 5, 25 through 29, Truly, truly, I say to you, an hour is coming and is now here when the dead will hear the voice of the Son of God, and those who hear it will live. For as the Father has life in Himself, so He has granted the Son also to have life in Himself. And He has given Him authority to execute judgment, because He is the Son of Man. Do not marvel at this, for an hour is coming when all who are in the tombs will hear His voice and come out. Those who have done good to the resurrection of life, and those who have done evil to the resurrection of judgment. If you find yourself in God's waiting room, and God seems silent and not working in your time frame, understand that God doesn't work on our time. Understand that sometimes what is painful, God uses to strengthen us. And that even if God does not work for you in the way that you want Him to, understand there's a day coming when all of us will hear the voice of Jesus. All the dead will rise, and all those who are found in Christ will hear those sweet words, well done, good and faithful servant. And we will live in the presence of the Lord forever. And no matter what's happened here, death, disease, no matter what it is, it will all be forgotten, because it will all pale in comparison to basking in the glory of the one true God. Tonight, if you need to respond to His invitation, He is the resurrection and life. And maybe right now you find yourself dead in your sins and trespasses. Jesus can resurrect you from that and forgive you. If you respond to His invitation, if you repent of your sin, die with Him in baptism, raised to walk a new life, forgiven of sin, receive the Holy Spirit to empower you to live the Christian life and follow after Jesus. You can do that tonight. Maybe you're already a child of God, as most of you are. But you veered from the path. You're no longer listening to Jesus, and you're no longer following Him. There's power in His words. Listen to Him. Come back to Him. Confess your sin, and He's just and faithful to forgive you. Whatever your need is, we would love to help you. Please come forward while we stand and while we sing.